I've covered thousands of hearings in my career, but what I witnessed yesterday in that congressional chamber wasn't just political theater. It was the real-time unraveling of an attorney general who thought she could deflect her way out of questions that demanded straight answers. And when Repsure Madeleine Dean pressed her on three simple facts, Pam Bondi didn't just dodge, she erupted. But here's what most people missed. This wasn't about partisan grandstanding. This was about a $400 million gift, a foreign government, and an attorney general who may have just revealed how deeply compromised this administration's ethics have become. Let me tell you exactly what happened, because the moment Bondi lost her composure wasn't when Dean asked the hard questions. It was when she realized there was no good answer to give. The hearing started routinely enough. Bondi sat confidently at the witness table, prepared for the usual back and forth that defines these congressional sessions. She had her talking points ready, her defenses rehearsed. What she didn't expect was Dean's surgical precision in exposing contradictions that cut to the heart of everything Bondi claimed to represent. Dean opened with something that should have been easy for any attorney general to address: the January 6th pardons. Here's a woman who spent her confirmation hearings promising to defend law enforcement, to stand up for the rule of law, to ensure that attacks on police officers would be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Standard rhetoric for anyone seeking to lead the Justice Department. But then Dean asked the question that shattered that narrative completely. How do you reconcile those promises with the blanket pardons issued on day one for every single person involved in January 6th? How do you claim to defend police officers while erasing accountability for one of the most violent assaults on law enforcement in modern history? 5 Capitol police officers lost their lives in the aftermath of that day. Others still carry physical and psychological trauma. These aren't abstract statistics. These are real people who responded to duty and paid an extraordinary price. And the first official act of this administration was to wipe the slate clean for the people who put them in danger. Bondi's response was telling. Not a defense of the decision, not an explanation of the legal reasoning, not even an acknowledgement of the officers who suffered, just a flat refusal to discuss any advice she may or may not have given the president. She retreated into executive privilege before the question was even fully formed, but that was just the setup. Because Dean wasn't finished. She had been building to something much more explosive. Attorney General, have you ever been registered as an agent of a foreign principal under the Foreign Agents Registration Act? This is where everything changed. This is where Bondi's composure started to crack, because Dean wasn't fishing. She had the documentation. She knew the answer. She was giving Bondi the opportunity to be honest about something that was already on the public record. And Bondi tried to spin it. She attempted to reframe her representation of Qatar as some noble anti-human trafficking effort related to the World Cup, as if the specific purpose of the representation somehow changes the fundamental fact that she was a registered foreign agent working for a government that would later shower her boss with gifts. Dean cut through that deflection immediately. You can't put words in my mouth, because that's exactly what Bondi was trying to do. Transform a straightforward legal question about foreign agent registration into something else entirely, something that sounded better in the political moment but ignored the ethical reality. Here's what the public needs to understand about this exchange. When someone is registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, it means they are officially working on behalf of a foreign government's interests in the United States. It's not inherently illegal, but it creates potential conflicts of interest that require disclosure, oversight, and in many cases, recusal from related matters. The problem isn't that Bondi represented Qatar. The problem is what happened next, and how she handled the disclosure requirements that are supposed to protect the American people from exactly these kinds of conflicts. Dean pressed further. Did Bondi properly disclose this relationship during her Senate confirmation hearings? This is critical because senators have a right to know about potential conflicts before they vote to confirm someone to lead the Justice Department. The answer was no. It was not in her disclosure documents. She failed to properly inform the Senate about a relationship that would become directly relevant to decisions she would face as Attorney General. And then came the bombshell that tied everything together. President Trump recently announced he would accept a $400 million luxury aircraft from Qatar. not a ceremonial gift, not some symbolic token of diplomatic friendship. A $400 million airplane that Trump himself said he wanted because it was prettier than his current aircraft. Under the Constitution, foreign gifts to U.S. presidents must be reviewed by Congress. They raise questions about influence, reciprocity, and the independence of American decision-making. They represent exactly the kind of foreign entanglement that the founders worried about when they wrote the Emoluments Clause. So Dean asked the obvious question: did Bondi provide legal advice that this gift was permissible? Did the woman who had previously worked as Qatar's representative in the United States advise the president that accepting hundreds of millions of dollars worth of gifts from that same foreign government was legally appropriate? Again, Bondi refused to answer, but her refusal wasn't based on executive privilege this time. It was based on the recognition that any answer would be politically damaging. Either she advised that the gift was appropriate, which would suggest her Qatar connections influenced her legal judgment, or she failed to recuse herself from the matter despite having a clear conflict of interest. This is where Bondi's strategy shifted from evasion to attack. When you can't defend your record, you attack the person asking the questions. She accused Dean of being unprofessional. She mocked the idea that the president wanted the jet because it was pretty, even though those were Trump's own words. But Dean was ready for that deflection too. He said it himself. Because that's exactly what Trump had said publicly. Bondi was attacking Dean for accurately quoting the president's own statements about why he wanted Qatar's gift. The hearing devolved from there. Bondi became increasingly agitated, talking over Dean, interrupting her questions, demanding that time be put back on the clock. The composed attorney general who had walked into that room was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely rattled by questions she should have been prepared to answer. Here's what makes this moment so significant. This wasn't just about one hearing or one contentious exchange. This was about transparency, accountability, and whether the American people have a right to know about potential conflicts of interest at the highest levels of government. When Dean asked about Qatar, she wasn't being partisan. She was doing exactly what congressional oversight is supposed to do. She was ensuring that the people charged with enforcing America's laws are not compromised by foreign relationships or financial entanglements that could influence their judgment. The fact that Bondi couldn't provide straight answers to straightforward questions tells us something important about how this administration views accountability. When officials retreat into evasion, when they attack questioners instead of addressing concerns, when they refuse to explain decisions that affect public trust, they're telling us that transparency is optional. But transparency isn't optional in a democracy. The American people have a right to know whether their attorney general has conflicts of interest. They have a right to know whether foreign governments are influencing American policy through gifts and relationships. They have a right to honest answers from the people who work for them. What we witnessed in that hearing wasn't just Pam Bondi losing her composure. It was the breakdown of accountability itself. It was a demonstration that this administration believes it can deflect, attack, and evade its way out of any question it doesn't want to answer. The Qatar connections matter because they represent a pattern. Foreign governments don't give hundreds of millions of dollars in gifts without expecting something in return. They don't hire American lawyers and then later shower those lawyers' future bosses with luxury aircraft out of generosity. They do it because influence matters, because relationships matter, because they understand something that apparently this administration wants the American people to forget. Democracy requires leaders who can be held accountable. It requires officials who will answer for their decisions and explain their relationships. It requires transparency about conflicts of interest and honesty about potential influences on government policy. What Pam Bondi demonstrated in that hearing was exactly the opposite. She showed us an administration that believes accountability is something you can simply refuse to participate in, that believes congressional oversight is an inconvenience to be deflected rather than a constitutional responsibility to be respected. The moment she erupted at Madeleine Dean wasn't just about personal frustration. It was about the collision between an expectation of transparency and an administration that has decided transparency is optional. It was about the recognition that some questions don't have good answers, and when that happens, the only strategy left is attack. But attacking the questioner doesn't make the questions go away. The American people still deserve to know about Qatar. They still deserve to know about foreign gifts. They still deserve to know whether their attorney general has conflicts of interest that could compromise her judgment. This hearing exposed something that goes far beyond one contentious exchange. It revealed an administration that believes it can govern without accountability, that can make decisions without explanation, that can accept foreign gifts while refusing to discuss the legal and ethical implications. That's not how democracy is supposed to work. And when officials like Pam Bondi refuse to provide the transparency that democracy requires, it becomes our responsibility to keep asking the questions, to keep demanding answers, and to keep holding power accountable whether it wants to be held accountable or not.